Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to B4 Live on Wednesday, the 8th of April. I'd like to introduce you to Tony Hobbs of Chapman, Robison and Moore Accountants. Good morning, Tony.
Well, it's afternoon actually, Richard, but don't worry about that.
Sorry, I did say morning and then went afternoon, so apologies. Well spotted. I see you're as sharp as ever.
Sharp as ever, mate, yep.
So how have you been coping over the past couple of weeks? You're saying off camera that it's pretty busy for you, or as busy as ever?
I think the last 2 weeks have probably been the busiest I've ever had in terms of hours in the day, because it's just been trying to keep up with everything. Things are literally changing by the hour, and just trying to keep clients as informed as possible. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, you're saying you're getting the government updates and they're coming through pretty well every hour.
Yeah, it's pretty much on the hour, and it's just sifting through the ones of those that are relevant and the ones where something has actually changed, and you actually need to keep the clients up to date on it.
But you're keeping your mind sharp with a bit of Aikido?
Yeah. I do a bit every day, just 30 minutes or so, just to keep myself fit. A little bit of running as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm amazed you actually get fully dressed in the whole kit and do it in the back garden.
I don't get fully dressed. We've been through this. Stop setting me up.
Right, I'm going to leave you to it. Let's get down to some sensible stuff because a lot of people joined us and want to hear from you. So I'll go off camera. If anybody's got any questions, please do put it in the chat function. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see when you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, the share screen green button. Obviously, don't push that. To the right of that, there's the chat function. Put your question in there, either for me personally, so I'm down as Richard and host, or put it for everyone. I'll get that question. I'll invite you to, on the chat either to come on live to put that question to Tony or to put it in the chat function and I can ask it for you. So if you can come on screen, it'd be great because it makes the whole session a lot more interactive. But if you'd rather I ask for you, happy to do so. So over to you, Tony. Look at that mug. My God.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Well, what I wanted to sort of talk about today and is go back and is the article I wrote for the last B4 magazine, which is all of a sudden has become, I think, very relevant to what's happening at the moment. Now, I know everybody will have read that article. That's your cue to come in and say, yes, of course they have, Richard. Thank you very much.
I'm just trying to get a link to the article in the chat function, but yeah.
Oh, okay, never mind. But the article that I wrote was, is a good business good for business? And what I was talking about there is something that I'm really interested and really passionate about. And it's about the responsibilities of business and how that aligns with what businesses are supposed to do in their own self-interest. Because there's an awful lot of talk these days about business responsibility and the needs for greater corporate responsibility. And I think there's a lot of the time more talk than action, especially from the bigger corporations. There's a lot of spin and hype, a lot of smoke and mirrors. And the last Davos summit was dominated by debates around saving the planet, fairer economics, and better business, reflecting this sort of current topic. If anybody's not aware, Davos is it's a World Economic Forum. It's like a center parks for big business. And at the one last summer, there were 200 business bosses, and these are the guys from the big companies that put delivering value for shareholders last on the list of their 5 factors for determining corporate purpose. The others on the list were customers, employees, suppliers, and communities. So for them to put the shareholders last is quite interesting because shareholder primacy has sort of long been embedded in UK corporate law. It's changed a bit in the 2006 Companies Act, but it's always been seen that it's the shareholders that have that's where the business have the main interest in getting the returns back to the shareholders. So for them to be putting them last on that list was quite interesting. Now, I would say I don't think it's right to actually rank that list, but I'll come on to that a bit later. And also, to be blunt with the big companies, I just don't actually believe them when they say that anyway. But my point is, so where does this leave the normal sort of SME business, the normal overwhelmed business boss who's trying to cope with running his business and is now being told that he's got to have a different level of responsibility. He's got to be thinking about all these other factors. And does it really actually make any difference to the way they operate? Well, I think the answer to that is no. And I think what it is that for a lot of people, it's seen these are things as opposite and opposing things, opposite and opposing interests. But it's all part of the same algorithm. And this is why I don't think you should rank the stakeholders in the business. I think you should consider them all on the same level. Because once you start ranking them, you're changing your priorities and you're changing your balance in your business. And I just think that that just makes it very, very difficult to do. But I think that when you take those 5 factors that we've just given, those 5 stakeholders in the business, if a business ignores any of them to go directly for the shareholder option, short-term profits, returns to shareholders, then that really is a short-term view, and the business just won't survive. You have to look after your employees, your suppliers, your customers, and also have an interest in your local community. And if you don't do that and manage that properly, as a short-term business, you're not going to survive. The big responsibility for all companies, though, the first and foremost, though, is they have to be profitable. Because you can talk about all this lovely stuff with giving back to the community and so on, but if you're not profitable, it's just not going to work. And I think a good example of this is that at CRM, we do a lot of support for charity. We allocate time for doing work in the community with charities. We're only able to do that because we've got the level of profits and reserves that allow us to allocate the time and say that time is going to go towards doing this. You can actually, and say to the team, you can have so much time per month to put towards good causes and so on. So to me, it's all about balance. You've got all these stakeholders in the business. You have to look after them all. And if you're doing that, then your business will be successful. You will thrive. So then in my article, I came on to say, so what needs to change? Well, if you've got a focused strategy and strong values for your business, which are encapsulated within your business plan, which you're following, then probably little, if anything, needs to change. You're doing all the right things. If you do not feel confident this is the case, then in my article, I threw out sort of 5 questions, which said you ask yourself these questions. And if you can't answer yes to them, then you may need to go back and look at what your business is doing. And the first question I put is, do you have systems in place to ensure that you deliver product services to your clients on time and fit for purpose? Do you monitor feedback and satisfaction and follow up on any issues raised? And secondly, do you ensure that your team are fairly treated, properly motivated and rewarded fully for their efforts? And have you got schemes in place to protect key employees and safeguard their future with you? And thirdly, do you have systems in place to ensure suppliers are treated fairly and paid on time, subject to them having delivered satisfactorily? And does your business plan include your contribution into the local community? And is this properly resourced? And I think this is very important because on this one, it does have to be part of your business plan. You do have to decide how much you're prepared to commit to this in terms of time and cash resources as well. And then everybody in the team has to be clear on this so they know how much time they can give up, what they are allowed to spend in actually doing this. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And the final question is, does your business forecast show the right level of profitability to sustain your plan? If you can answer yes to all those 5 questions, then you're in a good, strong position. And I don't think really much needs to change with what you're doing. If you can't, then I think you need to go back and look again at your strategy and your plan and what you're doing as a business, because you may well have an imbalance in the way you're treating the stakeholders in the business, which will cause you a problem later on. Now, the reason I think this has become particularly relevant in the last few weeks, when we're just completely uncharted waters for everybody. Nobody's ever seen anything like this again. And I think it's brought all these things back into perspective, because we've got the immediate impact of COVID-19 at the moment is we're in a lockdown, which is a strange situation. For my business, I've never worked from home before. I don't particularly like working from home, and I'm missing being in with the team in the office. And it's taken a little bit of moving around to get us actually, I think, working properly. And in this immediate impact of this lockdown, you then have to consider, okay, so the stakeholders in my business, how is this impacting them? So we've got a situation with most SMEs at the moment where you're likely to have some of your staff under the furlough scheme, or you've sent them to work from home when they're not used to doing that. And as a business, you certainly have a responsibility for the welfare of your employees, of your team, which includes their mental well-being as well as their physical health. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, Am I getting this right at the moment? Have I been clear in explaining to the employees that have been furloughed exactly what this means, what the implications are? Have I given the proper resources and backup to the people that are now working from home when they're not used to it? And some of them probably feeling quite isolated. And it's interesting because I come back on what we've done at CRM, and I actually think we've fallen down on this. We're not quite where we should be in doing this at the moment, and it's because it's new territory for us. Then you come to your suppliers. Now you've got the situation whereby all of a sudden the people that you were always paying bang on 30 days, you're looking at it and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, can I actually afford to do that? And it's been interesting for me because as well as advising clients, I also sit on the board of several companies. So there I've been acting as a director on those boards, giving advice as to how we deal with the situation. And one of the interesting meetings I had was where the MD of this one particular company said, we are stopping all payments. Everything stops now. And my view on that was that you're not being fair to your suppliers who've been loyal to you for a long time and have helped you to trade. And while we're having this conversation, somebody further up the food chain is having the same conversation about us. And if everybody turns the tap off at the same time, then the money stream dies and we're all in trouble. We've got to take a more balanced, a more pragmatic view about this. And we've got to look at it and say, we have to protect our supply chain. We can't just immediately irritate everybody by saying, well, we're not paying you. There's a virus. That's it. And the same with our customers. We're going to have the situation where our customers and clients, some genuinely just cannot pay. Others will be sort of pushing the envelope a bit and seeing what they can get out of you. And you've got to know how to keep up the levels of communication, of talking to people to make sure that you get it all balanced right, that you're not upsetting anybody, and that you're trying to keep everybody in the loop as to how you're reacting. And then, of course, there's our interaction in the community, which is now becoming increasingly difficult. Now, I did have an online meeting with one of the charities I work for last week, and we've got bi-weekly meetings checked in because this charity is in the educational sector, has been hit incredibly hard by the COVID-19 issue. So we're trying to look at how we can keep that going. But the input into the community it's just difficult at the moment. And so there we have immediate impacts of COVID-19 where things have moved so quickly, faster than I've ever seen them in a business sense. And we've all been reacting very quickly. And speaking from my personal point of view, not always getting it right. And sometimes looking back and thinking, well, Tony, you didn't actually really handle that too well. And you need to learn a lesson from that. And you need to always go back to your basic principles of saying, have I got the balance right in the way I'm running my business? Am I looking after all the stakeholders and communicating properly? Because I think the next thing that we need to consider is that the lockdown is not going to last forever. At some point, they're going to start easing restrictions and they're going to want to try and get the economy back moving on a normal level again. Now, the problem with this that I see is we will unfortunately be heading for some form of recession. We don't know how deep, we don't know what type of recession it will be, but business is not just going to go back to normal straight away. It just won't happen. So business owners will go from lockdown survival mode to recession survival mode. And I think we'll then have a lot of input coming from people when everybody starts to come back into let's call it the real community rather than virtual community. They'll be looking for answers. They'll be asking questions about how things were dealt with and should they be differently. And I think what often happens is that people do look to businesses, and there is often, I think, very unfair criticism put towards the business community about how they're not supportive enough and how they've been too harsh on dealing with employees, suppliers, and whatever. And businesses are going to have to be prepared for this, and they're going to have to consider whether, being brutally honest, you do actually need to make any changes, whether you do actually need to look at the way your business is operating and consider whether it's time for a change. Now, I'd go back on the point that I made at the end of my article that I believe that if you answered yes to all of those 5 questions, if you believe that you have a balanced business that is looking after all of its stakeholders and is operating with a good level of corporate due diligence, then you probably don't have to do much, but you need to let people know what you're doing. If you're doing everything correctly, but nobody knows, they're likely to assume that you're not doing this, that you're not doing it properly, that you actually simply, you don't care. So I think it's important about the message that businesses are putting out afterwards, and how we're dealing with the situation of when we're bringing people in. Let's look at the example of our team. When you bring in the employees back off furlough, and this is a conversation I had at one of the other companies I sit on the board of, we cannot expect people to come back from furlough, hit the ground running on day one, and be back working at the level they were before. It doesn't happen like that. It's going to take time to bring people back in, get them sort of familiarized with the business and the surroundings again, give them a chance just to think a little bit about what has happened during their period of furlough, get back up to speed with what they're doing. So I think all businesses are going to be slow once the lockdown starts to ease to get back up and running again. And it's going to be difficult because there'll be pressures coming from all directions. And I think the one thing that it's normal recession thing that I always say to people, do not sleepwalk into a disaster. Do not put your head down and think, I've just got to keep myself isolated and keep on with what I'm doing and keep my business running. You've got to lift your head up and look at what's happening around you and make sure that you haven't moved away from your core plan. Make sure that you are still keeping all the stakeholders happy in your business, and you are still doing all the right good things that you had planned before. Don't deviate from your plan because you're in recessionary times. You have to be a bit more reactive, and you do have to look at what's going on around you. But if you have the right business setup, I firmly believe that you will get through if you continue on those same good core principles and keep running your business in that way. And I think this becomes even more important in that, as I said, the lockdown will finish, but it won't finish quickly. I certainly can't. I said when this all first started, I thought we were into 4 to 6 months. I'm probably still sticking with that. I'm just a bit too unsure about where my actual start date is now. But I think we've got 4 to 6 months of a very difficult time before we get back to normal in terms of how we're actually doing business. But I think then we will find ourselves, there will be a recession of some sort, as I say, and we need to be thinking about how we deal with that and how our business is presented. Because I do think, as I said a few moments ago, even if you're doing all the right things, you have to be presenting that to the outside world. Otherwise, people will assume that you're not, and they won't necessarily look at you in the best light. And I think some businesses, and these are the ones that do a focused strategy, strong values, and a good plan, they will ultimately come out of this stronger in the medium to long term. In the short term, all businesses are going to take a hit. We're going to take a hit in that we're all going to lose clients and customers because the weaker businesses will just not survive. We will all see our reserves depleted because we're going to have to dig into those reserves to keep ourselves going, to make sure that we can keep our team together, to make sure that we can, the case from a CRM perspective, we're having to support some clients where I just know that they're not going to be able to pay us for quite some time. But we need to take the medium to long term view on this and look after our long standing loyal clients who are at the moment having a very difficult time, because there are some industries at the moment who've been hit so much harder than others. I was talking to one of my clients that owns a chain of gyms last week, and his business has literally turned off overnight. He's just had virtually everybody cancelling their standing orders and direct debits. He's obviously got no footfall for the day visitors. He's just seen that business drop up overnight. And the conversation we were having was what happens about the fees that he already owes us and how we can give him ongoing support at the moment, even though he can't pay us. So again, it's getting that balance right. It's looking at all the stakeholders in your business and making sure that you're protecting all of them so that your business can continue. And I did think it made me smile a little bit when this article was published, and it wasn't that long after when it became clear that COVID-19 was going to have a huge impact. And I thought, well, I'm not sure whether it's good timing or bad timing that the article went out then, but I do think that it is very, very relevant to what is going on at the moment. And as I say, stick to core principles and you will be okay. You will get through this. Can we have any questions now, Richard?
Well, you are very popular this morning, Tony. We have got a lot of questions for you, so I will go through this in order. I'll just ask just a quick one for me, saying about how supporting other companies with offering payment plans, etc. It's important, I should imagine, to put an end date to that to ensure that people don't get used to that, and you make sure you make it clear from the outset it is for a period.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that is very much the case. And this all comes down to the communication part. You have to keep communicating with people all the time. You have to be very, very clear about if there's a payment plan, then that payment plan has to be stuck to. One of the big things that I've had with one of the companies I sit on the board of is the commercial team saying, well, we can raise additional sales, but we've got to give increased credit at this point in time. And that was one. I did actually, I'm now called Mr. Grumpy in the corner on this particular board, but at that point I had to say, well, hold on a minute. Yes, we have to be supportive, but if we're giving additional credit in these times, we've got to be very, very careful about how we're making sure that that credit is actually justified.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got 6 questions. They're still coming in. So if you're happy to stay on beyond 12:30, Tony, if anybody that's got a question I'm going to ask has to drop off at 12:30, you can pick up Tony's answer on the video that we'll send out later. And I'm sure Tony will be happy for me to send you your details so that he can liaise with you direct, and maybe send
no problem.
a huge mug as well at the same time. First comment from Lucy Eckley. I've never heard Davos described as centre parks for big businesses before, so light-hearted one to start off there.
Well, I think it is. I'm just not sure about the bicycles.
Phil Plant, what's your view on SMEs topping up the extra 20% of salary that is not covered by the furlough scheme?
Well, that's a really interesting point. And I think one of the discussions I've been having on this is that I think you have to look at it, the fairness of how you're treating your staff. And you also have to look at their position as well, their financial position. Now, one of the views I had is that if you're furloughing some staff, if you leave them on 100%, then you're asking the other staff who are not furloughed to cover a lot of additional work. But where's the quid pro quo? Where's the fairness in that? So they look at their teammate who's been furloughed is still on 100%, and they're doing nothing, whereas they're shouldering all of the burden. But I do think that if you're only going on 80%, you do need to talk to the individuals and make sure that that's not going to have too much of a big impact on them, because for some people a 20% reduction in salary is quite significant. The other thing we have looked at in one particular company on this is that, and I'm still fairly confident this can be done, is rotational furlough rather. Furlough is a minimum period of 3 weeks, but in my view, there's no reason that you couldn't furlough one individual for 3 weeks, then bring them back in and furlough somebody else. So do a rotation. There are some practical issues with that, but I think it does work.
Rotational lockdown sounds interesting. Maybe you could do a webinar on that next week, Tony. I'm going back to your point about the SMEs. We had, Lucy was agreeing to your point, basically saying 100% agree with that approach for suppliers. We all have to support each other so far as we can and treat our suppliers as we'd like to be treated. And then to follow up that particular point, Stephen Spencer, I agree, Lucy. I actually offered a client the facility to pay me in 2 installments. They're a much bigger client, bigger business than I am, but have big overheads, and they were very grateful for my offer. They will also remember who supported them in the long run. So,
good point,
Stephen. Tim Wraith, you got a question? Tim from Sobel House.
Would be.
Can you start again, Tim? Because you only just sort of came in halfway through your question.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you? Okay.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
My first point would be, if I ran my own business, I'd want you to be my accountant. I just want to make that.
Oh.
And I suppose I learned from the conversation this morning that accounts is not all about facts and figures. It's also about, it's very much trying to connect with people, and it's all relational. So thanks. I thought it was a really great talk we just said. But I was just going to make a point from.
He's not like this in real life, Tim.
Oh, I think it is. I know Tony well. I know Tony well.
I know.
So cool. He looks so cool with one earphone on and one. He's like on Radio 1, isn't he? Looks
he's our accountant. He does a great job. So,
but my point was just speaking on the other from a charity point of view. It was great hearing what you said, Tony, about the responsibility businesses have for their staff, for their organisations, for charities. But from our charity point of view, we've got responsibility as well to connect with our supporters and understand that businesses support Sober House, but over the last couple of weeks, businesses have just been trying to sort out to make sure they've got a business to be able to support Sober House in weeks and months.
Yeah, absolutely.
From a charity point of view, we are probably in a better position than a lot of charities. So rather than saying it's crisis at Sober House, which it isn't, but it could be if it went on for months and months, but it's, we are perfectly okay. But our message has, because people will remember how people behaved. I heard this the other day. People will remember how people behaved through this period of time. Over the next 2 or 3 months, how people portray themselves. And it's important for charities to do exactly the same as well, because some are in better positions than others. That's my point, really. But
yeah, very true. Good point,
really
Tim.
Great points, Tony. So thanks for that. That was really
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, next question. This is from Richard Dory. Will there not be a rebound in spending as people are not spending much now apart from on food and rent, etc.? So some companies need to plan for a big increase in business, whilst others will be in a different place. So possibly curbing a recession from being too deep.
I think that is a really interesting point. I think what might work against that is that a lot of recessionary impact is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is one of the problems we have at the moment. We have information overload. We have so much going on in the media at the moment. And as they put out the warnings about recession and deep recessions, and they start talking about 1930s style depression, which I personally think is really unhelpful, that will definitely govern people's spending habits. And I think it's very true. There's a lot of people at the moment who are sat at home, and apart from paying for Netflix, they're not paying for much else. And they will be saving some money, but I just think people are going to be very cautious when we do start to come out of this. And they will be seeing a lot in the media about what the recession is going to be like and what's going to happen. And I think that might hold back some of the spending.
Hopefully that helps, Richard. If you've got any other anything to add, please do so in the messages or come on screen. No, he's happy with that. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tony. Got a bit of a challenge before I ask Lucy's question. We've got Chris asking where your proper rugby jersey is.
I think you need to mute him, Richard.
He's a South African, so I've thrown down the challenge to come on and ask you himself in his jersey, but he's so far.
Well,
so
I can just say I've got my England fleece on and my Rugby World Cup 2019 polo shirt on under there. So
I was
bring it
going
on,
to say
Chris.
shorts. Then I was worried what you're going to say next. Then
no, I haven't got any shorts on at all, mate.
Now all these South Africans are all talking. I mean, let's see whether he can come. I'm wearing a close to a Springbok jersey more than you are, Chris. So let's see if you can back up your words. Right, Lucy, I need to bring you on. You've got the next question.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Lucy.
Great presentation.
I love the wallpaper, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I get lots of comments on that. I just have to watch what I'm wearing, though. If I wear anything, there's far too much pattern stuff going on. Yeah, it's a really great point. And obviously, I 100% agree that it's really important at the moment to be visible and be communicating with all of your stakeholders, including team members, employees that you have that are furloughed. And I just wanted to ask a practical question about that, because obviously people who are furloughed are not allowed to be working, but looking at kind of proactive ways to communicate with them. And I was just wondering, what would be the view if you invite somebody who's furloughed to, take part in something like this, for example, so, to join video conferences with their team or with a leader. Would that be viewed, do you think, as working, or is that something that could be seen more practically?
I think that is a really, really good point, because to keep people communicating, I think this is a good sort of thing to bring people on. My personal view, and this is just my personal view, is no, because they're not providing a service or generating any income for the business. You are allowed to continue to train and study while you're on furlough. I would put this type of thing as coming under there. But I think it's a great point, because all this stuff has been brought in so quickly. None of it is being put into any form of legislation as of yet. And I do think that, being very cynical, when we do come out the other side of this, there's going to be a huge cost for the Treasury, and they will be looking to claw it back. So I would say to anybody that is using furlough, make sure that, as far as you're concerned, you are sticking to the rules, because if you don't, then you're going to get a clawback, and it's not going to be pleasant. I think that is a great point, Lucy, but I do feel that this type of thing would come up more, to my mind, it's more under the training, educational side of things. One of my guys watching this, if they're on furlough, they're not providing any services for CRM, they're not generating any business, and I think it is a good way for people to stay in touch.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, Chris has risen to the challenge, not to harp on, but England 2000. Yeah, okay, Chris. I think you need to come on screen and put all these facts. keep poking all this English. Brilliant, Tony. Well, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Really thorough and in-depth presentation. Thank you very much, and to everybody that joined us and asked questions. So we've got just a couple of things to wrap up. We will be sending a copy of the presentation, the video outline later. And together with Tony's details, if you do want to ask, Tony any questions direct. So we've got on the B4 website, we've got this community support pages with daily updates going on there. So please do send information through. We can post it on the site for you. And then we've got you can read more at the links. COVID-19 update. So to avoid the news and get into depressed by all the latest updates, then do have a look at the latest update on the B4 site just to get a snapshot of where we're up to. We've got the latest offer from B4, a 90-day free trial. So if you're not a member and you want to get the benefits of B4 membership for the next 90 days free of charge, no obligation, then please do sign up. We will eventually be gating this content, so it is only available for B4 members to view live and to view the videos online, but for now it's open to everyone, so do please spread the word to your networks. The B4 Live pages on the website have details about the next talks, and then you can catch up, so you can register at the buttons being highlighted as you've done for today's, and then you also, further down the page, you've got the videos of all the last talks that you can catch up if you missed them. Some really great talks there. Click on the button and watch them via YouTube. Tomorrow we've got, we sort of second time around on the loop, so we've got Kate Stinchcombe-Gillies on what to say and do when it's no longer business as usual. Highly recommend Kate's talk, and if you can, do have a look at her talk, which is the first of this particular series. And then just actually got a couple of just some comments really back to you, Tony. Thanks, really useful, great insights from a lot of the people mentioning your talk. And then last thing, I think we've got one more slide. No, that's it. So that's all from us. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for everybody.
Thank you, Richard.
And we'll see you all soon. Take care.